It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to what I'm sure will be an absolutely riveting presentation in this March of the Living, Australia's 21st online event this year. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we work and live, and on which this online event is being hosted today. We pay our respects to Indigenous elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. Chanukah, for many of us, is a chag that means many, many different things. It brings out the light. It casts a shadow on the darkness. It's a time for reflection. It's a time that links us to our ancient heritage. It's a time that brings families together. It's a time for rejoicing. It's a time for contemplation. It's a time for so many things. When we considered how best or who best to portray the linkages between these vast and various elements of this chag, its meaning, its sources, its roots, how embedded it is in Israeli culture, in Jewish culture, we could think of no one better than our friend and colleague, Julian Resnick. Julian is one of the most skilled guides I've had the pleasure of working with. And together with 72 participants on the Adult March of 2019, we had the pleasure of listening to the pearls of wisdom and the knowledge that came out of Julian's mouth, and shared the love that he has not only for Jewish peoplehood, but for people of Israel and all Jewish people and humankind in general. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Julian. Julian, thank you very much.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. By the way, folks, the head that you saw popping onto the screen a moment ago is my son-in-law, because you can probably tell from my hairstyle that I'm from the generation that has no idea how to put together, webinars and Zoom programs. I like actually being with people in the same room. I like being with people on the same bus and out in the sites. So Ido Romano, my son-in-law, is actually helping me through this evening. So as I told Cedric beforehand, and for those of you who know me, there are a couple of you that I've traveled with, and of course I saw Shirley Atlas' name pop up, and Shirley and I go back probably 50, or I hate to say, there's probably about 53, 55 years now, from when we were growing up in South Africa. You'll know that I always have a plan, and then I change things as I go along. And I just have to say, Cedric, when you did what I knew you would do, mention the indigenous people, I thought to myself, if I were opening this up in Israel, would the notion of indigenous people be just another one of those complicated and nuanced issues that we would have to deal with? Because of course there are some people who claim that we are not indigenous over here. I disagree, but nothing is straightforward. Nothing is straightforward over here. So I'm delighted to be able to do this. What I'm going to do this for you this evening, for me this morning in Israel, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk, and at the same time I'm going to take you on a little tiyul, on a journey through Israel. And the pieces that you're going to see of the journey are taken out of a 45-minute movie that Ido helped me make for March of the Living International. But I preferred, because I have a connection with Australia, I prefer to actually do bits and pieces of the movie, plus talk and interact with you. But if you want to see the whole movie, it actually will be available on the March of the Living International website as of this coming Friday. So when I was approached to do an Israel tiyul around Chanukah, I thought to myself, Chanukah, it's the quintessential Jewish holiday. And why is it the quintessential Jewish holiday? Because constantly, over the generations, we have turned it into what we want it to be. You know, for the pioneers, for the chalutzim, all of a sudden, Chanukah is no longer a story of the miracle of Pach HaShemen, of the oil that lasts for 8 days in the temple, but it becomes the story of tough Jews, of starke Juden, of Jews, of starke Yid, of the Jew who is taking the power back from a state of powerlessness, and it is adopted by the pioneers, by the Chalutzim, the early Zionists, as all about Jewish might. But then, you go forward into, and please don't misunderstand me. This is not a general comment on United States Jewry. But you go fast forward into the 21st century, into the United States of America, and Adam Sandler, who's somebody you might know, an American Jewish comedian, goes on to Saturday Night Live, one of the great American comedy shows on television, and sings the following: "Put on your yarmulke, here comes Chanukah, so much Chanukah to celebrate Chanukah." So Chanukah really is so Jewish because we constantly look at our present situation and then you turn Chanukah into something that works for us. So what I'm going to do on this little Chanukah Tiyul with you is I'm going to take you to a number of sites in Israel, and in each site we're going to dedicate one of the 8 candles, either to a value or to elements of what makes us Jews, elements of our identity. So let me just say that those of you who've traveled with me know that beginnings are very important to me. I think very, very seriously, where am I going to when I guide in Israel, which is what I do most of the time, at least pre-corona, I always say, where is the first place that I'm going to use to speak to people? Where am I going to choose to make my opening remarks? And I do that because I'm aware that when the remarks you use right in the beginning, the place you choose to actually begin really makes a difference and a huge impression on the overarching narrative, on the context that you create for whatever journey you're running. By the way, I would suggest to you, as people living in Australia, just think to yourselves, if you are a Jew from Perth, Sydney, Melbourne, or Adelaide, or wherever else you might find yourself, where would you take people? If they arrived in your city, where would you take them? I said this, by the way, to a group in Israel once from New Zealand. And when I visited New Zealand, the first thing they did when they took me off the plane, instead of taking me to my hotel, which I was desperate to go to, is they said, "Sorry, we're now taking you to a site so that you can see where we would introduce you to New Zealand," which it was good that they'd heard me in Israel. A little bit difficult when I was dying to get to my hotel, as I'm sure some of my tourists are dying to do as well when they travel with me. So I'm going to take you to light the first candle in Israel to one of my favorite places in Israel. Anybody want to just guess for yourselves and write it down on a little piece of paper next to you, or just in your minds think, where is the place that I'm going to take you to, the first place in Israel? I see Shane is about to write it down on a piece of paper. Shane, I'm sure that's your daughter sitting next to you. Hi, Shane's daughter. I don't know your name. Where would you go? Where would you go? So you've written something, or it's in your mind. So this is where I am taking you now. I am going to take you to the Davidson Archaeological Garden. I'm going to show you a little clip now on the screen, and you'll begin to understand why it is important to me, why I want to start at the Davidson Archaeological Garden. This, folks, this over here that Orly is showing you again, this is the evidence. This is over 2,000 years old. This used to be up on the wall behind, and actually fell down when the rest of this rubble fell down. Remember when? You remember, it was on the 9th day of Av in the year 70. So we start over here because clearly one of the questions that we are going to be dealing with today is, what is the history? What is the big story over here? I'm hoping that some of you recognize that site. For those of you who didn't, it's right on the corner of where the southern edge of the Western Wall turns to what is the Southern Wall. And the reason I took you over there is because that little piece that you saw over there is a copy of the original. It's so important, an archaeological find, that the original is actually in the Israel Museum, which basically says this is the place of the blowing of the shofar. And why is it so important for me? Because we're involved in a struggle around history and a struggle around memory. And the struggle that we're involved in with respect to this particular place is that there are people in the world who have decided that we have no connection to this place. And the first thing that I do with groups when I bring them to Israel is I say, you need to know something. We have deep, deep connections to this place. If there is something that I can take Shane's daughter to, because I'm sure she's studied a little bit of Hebrew already. Sorry, I'm picking on you, but I love children and you are the only child I see on the screen. I can take Shane's daughter and I can ask her to read over there, and she has learned Hebrew in the 21st century, and she can read something that was written 2,100, even longer, that many years ago. Seems to indicate that we were there. So I think that what I want to say is that when I tell the story of Chanukah, the first of the values, or the first identity item that I want to put out there is I want to dedicate my first candle to history. I'm going to get back to the history in a moment, but for me, it's never only about history. For me, it's also about something else. So I'm now going to take you just around the corner to the Southern Wall, and I am going to take you to the Southern Steps, and I want to show you something. So come with me now, just around the corner. We'll have a drink of water, please, because it's hot in Israel. Not now, actually today, but when you visit, it's generally hot. We're going to go to the Southern Steps. So in the Davidson Center, this is actually the place that I really love coming to. And I say, when anybody says to me, where do we have to go to? I always say the Southern Steps. Now, most of you have been here before, I know that. All of you who watched that wonderful webinar that Asaf Boker did previously on Sukkot for the March of the Living International were over here with him. Really, really a wonderful webinar. I came here in spite of the fact that Asaf brought you over here. I came here because there is something that I want to say over here. And what do I want to say over here? The second element is memory. Now, in some way, I want to define what memory is. So memory for me is something that we have deep inside, something that we are often unaware of, but that when we have certain experiences, we have this feeling that we've seen these things before, that we've heard these things before, that we've felt things before. And it's an element that plays into just really very much who we are. So what I want to do now is I am going to play you, I'm going to put up a song. And the song that you're going to hear is from one of the reality programs on Israel television, in which young people or other, anybody who has some type of singing talent comes forward and tries to become a star. In Israel, it's called Kochav Nolad. I'm sure you have something on Australian television which is similar. And I want you, I put the whole song up. And what you're going to see now is something that it depends on who you are and depends on what touches you. I was so moved by this particular song, and sit back, listen to the song. If you want to, every now and then, close your eyes. I just think it's one of those moments in which we as Jewish people connect with something very deep down inside of us. No matter, by the way, how we express ourselves as Jews, whether we are Orthodox, whether we daven 3 times a day, or whether we go to shul once a year on Yom Kippur to see our business partners, whatever type of Jew we actually are, I think in some way this really speaks to us as Jewish people.
Shir lamalot esanai el erim me'ayin yavo ezri me'im Hashem oseh shamayim va'aretz אל יתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא יישן שומר ישראל, השם ישמורך, השם צילך על יד ימינך, יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם, מעתה ועד עולם. שיר המעלות אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם עושה שמיים וארץ, אל יתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא יישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך על יד ימינך, יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם שומרך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם, מעתה ועד עולם.
I don't know about you folks, but when I heard this, I'm trying to remember. Is it because I remember a pilgrimage to the temple from thousands of years ago? Now we know as rational human beings that's not the case, but I maintain that every now and then, as a Jewish person, when I see certain things or I hear certain things, I'm just reminded, in some way, I'm reminded of something else. So, by the way, for those of you who haven't traveled with me, I don't apologize for getting emotional about the things that I care about. That is who I am. And anybody who travels with me has to put up with me whenever I'm talking about things that are important to me, which is most of the time I talk about things that I care about. It affects me, very deeply, and I've never felt the need to hide any of that or to hold it back. So we're now going to move on from this moment of, for me, this powerful moment of memory, and get back to the first candle that I mentioned, the candle connected to history. I'm going to take you now up to a place that most Jewish tourists never go to. I'm going to take you onto the Temple Mount. Most Jewish tourists don't go there for one of a number of reasons. The majority don't go there because the word is out there that it's a scary place, that is not a safe place to go. I try to take most of my groups there because I feel that I have something to say over there, and I think it's an important part of a journey to Israel. Many of the major organizations forbid you from taking groups over there. So I think March of the Living might be one of them that says because of security considerations, you can't go up into the Temple Mount. Yeah, so I happen to disagree, but I don't make the rules. So I want you to come with me up onto the Temple Mount, and just a short clip that I prepared from the Temple Mount, and we'll play it again, and let's try and get the video to work for you. We're headed up for the Temple Mount, something most tourists never do. So I want to continue in this spot. We introduced the big story. We talked about the historical moment, and I thought it would be a great idea to bring you up onto the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount, known by the Muslims of Haram al-Sharif, the holy sanctuary, is a place that is considered to be holy to a number of faith groups. Us, the Jewish people, the Muslims, and even the Christians, of course, have a connection over here via the Old Testament. The question of how we behave over here on the Temple Mount is a fascinating one. I'm not sure how many of you have been here because Jewish groups tend not to come up over here. The only people who are allowed to pray on the Temple Mount are the Muslims. Christians and Jews are not allowed to pray over here. Who made that crazy decision, you might say? You might have jumped out of your chairs in Los Angeles, in Melbourne, in Cape Town, Johannesburg, in London, and said, who made that terrible decision? I want to tell you who it was. It was the Supreme Court of the State of Israel. If you want to understand why, let's just walk around the Temple Mount for a few moments, and then I'll explain why that decision was made. So I'm going to explain why the decision was made. The decision was made, as I said, by the Supreme Court of Israel. Now, I want you to think of Chanukah. Chanukah, part of the way we tell the story of standing up against the attempts of another people to take over our temple, who we tell ourselves desecrated our temple. And therefore we say, the Maccabees rise up and take action against the desecration of our temple. And yet I stand in 2021 on the Temple Mount, no temple, of course, destroyed by the Romans in the year 70. And on top of the Temple Mount stands a mosque, Al-Aqsa, one of the largest mosques in the world, in fact. Who controls the Temple Mount in the day-to-day running of the Temple Mount today? It's the Waqf, the Muslim religious authority. And you might say to yourselves, hang on, but Israel is the sovereign, we have the power, and yet we do not control what goes on the Temple Mount. Something doesn't seem to add up. Wasn't the Chanukah story about us taking power in our own hands? And yet, if you listen to the decision of the Supreme Court of the State of Israel, it's really a fascinating decision. The decision of the Supreme Court says the following: all peoples have an inherent right to pray where they wish to pray. However, says the Supreme Court of Israel, this court is not only responsible for the rights of people to pray wherever they wish to pray, this court is also responsible for maintaining law and order and a measure of peace in this society. And because the court also has that responsibility, the court has determined that if the court allows people other than Muslims to pray on the Temple Mount, it will create chaos and death. And you probably are aware that there have been various moments on the Temple Mount in recent years where that type of scenario has actually played out. And I think one of the fascinating questions that we have to ask ourselves is, when we have power, when we eventually do have the tools by which we govern ourselves, is power only about being able to do whatever you want to do in the space that you control? Or is power also about restraint, about understanding what you need to allow to happen in the space that you control to enable the society to function in the best possible way? It's a difficult question. It's not one that I think there is an easy answer to. But the candle that we are dedicating over here, before we move on to the next place, I'm aware that I'm using a tremendous amount of time over here, He's actually the candle of history. But I think that when we look at history, the question is, how do we understand history? How do we interpret history? And how do we use history as a tool for living our lives today? We're moving on. And as Monty Python once said, now for something completely different. The next candle, and I'm going to ask Ido to put up the movie right now, and I'm going to be silent, I'm going to talk over it, is actually dedicated to diversity. I want to say the following about diversity. As you all know, Israel is a very, very diverse, very diverse country. Yeah. And when we talk about diversity, one of the things that we often do, is that we talk about diversity as being something that we demand for ourselves. Okay, for us, a diverse society allows us to behave in the ways that we feel comfortable with. Now, what you're seeing on the screen is some of the diversity of Israel. I maintain that only if diversity works in both directions can we actually claim it as a value in our society. You know, many people like me, and you saw what I look like, have many things to say about ultra-Orthodox Jews in Israel and claim that they limit our expression. But at the same time, you've seen the gay pride parade or part of the gay pride events in Tel Aviv. If the people dancing in Tel Aviv do not allow the Jews in Jerusalem, some of them who want to eat Ashkenazi food from Europe and daven 3 times a day, to have their type of Judaism, then it isn't a country that celebrates diversity at all. So that candle I've actually dedicated to diversity. We're going to move on now to the next candle. So the next candle, and Ido, you can put the picture up on the screen. What I'm going to do now is I want you to see there's a hole in the ground. Okay, this is not a video, folks. It's just going to stay as it is over here. You see the hole in the ground? Anybody just, what is the hole in the ground? Okay, not only Shane's daughter should be guessing what the hole in the ground is, you should all be asking yourselves, what is the hole in the ground? Now, by the way, I'm sure there's a whole range of answers as to what the hole in the ground is. If I were to ask Israelis what the hole in the ground is, here I am sitting just right next to the hole in the ground, keep it as it is, most Israelis would not have no idea what the hole in the ground is either. Now, if I were to ask you and Israelis, where on earth are the graves of the Maccabees? You wouldn't have any idea, I'm guessing. If I were to ask either you or Israelis, no idea. But if you take your ways and you put in Kivrot HaMaccabim, and this is where it'll take you to. Now, when you go to this place, if you have a keen eye, and if you know something about archaeology, you probably might have noticed that this is actually not from the same period as the Maccabees. It's actually probably something around 4th century, 5th century, the hole in the ground that you saw a moment ago. It's actually from the Byzantine period. So how does this become Kivrot HaMaccabim? How do many places in Israel, by the way, end up being connected, or are we told that have a particular historical meaning? Let me tell you a story. You've all heard of the Herzliya Gymnasia. Nod your heads if you've heard of the Gymnasia Herzliya, the first Hebrew high school in Tel Aviv. Some of you been on a street in Tel Aviv called Bograshov. You might have heard of Bograshov Street. Nod your head if you've heard of Bograshov Street. The history teacher at the Gymnasia Herzliya was Mar Bograshov, Mr. Bograshov. One day he took the pupils, the young people from the beginnings of Tel Aviv, about 1910, he takes them to the area of Modi'in to tell them the story of the Maccabees. And he's looking for a place to tell the story. And he sees these graves and he says to himself, Mushlam, perfect. I found a place to tell the story. And Mar Bograshov, today everybody just knows it as Rehov Bograshov, Bograshov Street in Tel Aviv. He tells them that these are the graves of the Maccabees. Now, folks, we've done that all over Israel. You need places to tell big stories. To tell a good story, you often need a place to go to. The early Zionist pioneers understood that perfectly. When the state of Israel is created and Moroccan and other North African Jews begin to arrive in Israel, they are used to going to Kivrei Tzadikim, the graves of their great rabbis, to pray at a Hilulah once a year. So what does the Ministry of Religious Affairs do in Israel in the 1950s? It demarcates certain graves in the country and connects them to the Jewish story. You can actually find in Israel a grave site for Mordechai and Esther. Come on, Mordechai and Esther in the land of Israel, but people need a place to be able to tell stories. Now, Ido's going to put on the next video, and I want to say that there is a purpose in telling stories. I don't for a moment want to put down the notion of telling stories. Telling stories is connected to this next value that I want to mention, that is the value of continuity. To have a people to continue to exist, what we need is we need places in which we can take a story, and we can use that story to move forward. So right next to the graves of the Maccabees, you will find this. You'll find this particular site, which is in fact a site that if you look at very carefully in a moment, you'll understand what it is. This is a site which connects the ongoing story of the Jewish people. This site, as those of you who know Hebrew, and I'm sure there are a couple of you who do, this is one of the andartaot, one of the memorials in Israel to the soldiers who have fallen in the wars of the wars in which have kept us secure over the years in Israel. Now, I want to say the following, as we have this in the background, and this is on the screen, and it's the following. Our continuity as a people has often been in the balance, something that you all are very aware of. And the balance has often been about the question of powerlessness and power. It is one of the central questions in the story of the Jewish people. What happens to us when we are powerless? And why is it so important for us to have power? I'm going to read just a few lines. Now, some of you will recognize these lines, I'm hoping. And these are the lines. Come now, and I will bring thee to their lairs, the privies, jakes, and pig pens, where the heirs of the Hasmoneans lay with trembling knees, concealed and cowering, the sons of the Maccabees. Anybody have any idea who wrote that poem and in what year? So I know you can't answer because we've muted you. Some of you are saying to yourselves, isn't that Bialik? Isn't that Chaim Nachman Bialik? And didn't he write it in 1904 after he witnessed the results of the pogrom in Kishinev? And in fact, folks, that is a part of the story as well. Our continuity, which this candle is dedicated, has depended to a large extent on our ability to move from a state of being powerless to a state of power. Of course, when we claim power for ourselves, as we have, thank God, in the state of Israel, it comes with a price. And the memorial you see is actually a memorial to those who stood up on our behalf and paid the price so that we would be a people of power. The next candle. So this is a March of the Living program, and the truth is, even if this were not a March of the Living program, I would want to dedicate a candle to those members of our families, those people who once lived in the cities, towns, villages, and shtetls of Europe, and who were subjected to the horrors of the Nazi Holocaust. I'm of course going to take you to a place that you'd imagine I would take you to in Israel to talk about this for a moment. When I was growing up in South Africa, it was a Jewish community with very, very few survivors. My father's sister married a survivor, but he was the only survivor that I knew. And until I came to live in Israel, I really lived in a Jewish community in which the Holocaust, of course, had a role, but it wasn't front center. Once I moved to Israel, and when I went to work afterwards at some point in England and in the United States of America, the place of Holocaust survivors really became much more significant in the communities that I was a part of. I want to dedicate this candle to those of our brothers and sisters who perished in the Shoah, as well as those who survived. Walk with me to the main square of Yad Vashem. So we walked along the Avenue of the Righteous amongst the nations to the main square in Yad Vashem, the National Memorial and Museum to the Holocaust of the State of Israel. When I was working in England as a shaliach for the State of Israel, I met a Holocaust survivor who made a huge impression upon me, Rabbi Hugo Grin. Rabbi Hugo Grin tells an extraordinary story connected to Chanukah, and I'm going to read you something written by Rabbi David Wolpe of Temple Sinai in Los Angeles. So this is what I want to read to you. Rabbi David Wolpe writing about Rabbi Hugo Grin on Chanukah. I have known many people, Holocaust survivors, refugees who fled oppression, people plagued with illness and others to whom life has dealt cruel blows. Some of them lost everything and had to begin again. Despite many reasons to despair, in a crucial turn toward the future, resilient spirits choose renewed hope and rededicated themselves to purposeful living. That Chanukah moment is the inspiration we all need. Everyone fails in ways large and small and needs the strength to rise anew. Chanukah is a winter holiday, except of course if you find yourselves in the Southern Hemisphere. It shines light in the darkest time of the year. Each night we add another light, increasing until the entire Chanukah menorah is illuminated. The late Rabbi Hugo Grin was a child in Auschwitz. The holiday of Chanukah came, and after fashioning a makeshift menorah, his father melted the precious margarine ration to light a wick for the first night. The young Hugo, outraged, protested to his father. How could he use the food which sustained them in the midst of such horror just to observe the holiday? Many years later, Rabbi Grin said that at that moment his father spoke words he never forgot. His father said, "My child, we have learnt over here that you can live for 3 days without water. We have learnt that you can live for 3 weeks without food, but you cannot live for 3 minutes without hope." This candle I dedicate to Rabbi Hugo Grin and others who perished and survived the Nazi horrors in Europe. So we're going to move now to a couple of very different candles. I'm an immigrant. Okay, I left the place of my birth when I was 22 years old. Of my own volition. It was the choice I made. I came to Israel for the first time when I was 18, and life-changing experience. I understood for the first time, talking very personally just for myself, what home felt like. That was 1972. You can do the maths in terms of how old I am. In 73, the year after I came to Israel, was the Yom Kippur War. I returned to work as a volunteer on Kibbutz to help while the men were still in the front lines. I was supposed to not be sitting over here this evening. The trajectory at that point is that I was supposed to be wearing a white coat with a stethoscope today and not sitting over here opposite you. But I never completed medical school because of the huge impact that the Yom Kippur War made on me. Even though I went and did 1 year of medical school, I just realized that I was not going to stay on in South Africa for 6 more years. And after finishing my BA, I made Aliyah. But for all of those of us who are immigrants, and I'm guessing that there are a couple of you this evening sitting in your rooms who are immigrants as well, the notion of leaving your family of origin, whether you are forced to or you choose to, it's a huge part of your life going forward. You leave your family of origin. For those of us who left at a certain point, it meant, and even for me in the 1970s, it meant there were certain members of my family who were hugely significant to me that I never saw again. So I think when you're an immigrant, one of the things you really need to and want to do is to build a family. And I am dedicating this next candle to family, and we're going to do it the other way around, right? And I would just say the following: I have lived on kibbutz now. I'm a kibbutznik, which means I'm almost an extinct species. Tiny numbers of us still live on kibbutzim. I'm a kibbutznik who is a very lucky kibbutznik. I'm part of 3 generations of my family on kibbutz. It's myself, my wife, 2 of my 3 children, and all 6 of my grandchildren. I live within 100 meters of 6 grandchildren. I dedicate this candle to family, and I want to show you just for a minute, a moment from last Chanukah with one of my grandchildren. And I think you'll understand why it feels like such a special, privilege that I have.
Ronnie, stop hitting me in the face. So we started with Pesach, we moved on to Rosh Hashanah, and now it's Chanukah. And she's feeling appropriately feisty. The first Chag we were together for was Pesach, then was Rosh Hashanah, and now it's Chanukah. So, as with the first 2 Chagim, we're going to sing something for this one as well. Banu choshech legaresh, beyadenu or va'esh, kol echad hu or katan, vekulanu or eitan, sura choshech halashchor, sura mipnei ha'or, which translated basically means when we have put all our lights together, we're really tough and strong. And we are coming together to get rid of the darkness and bringing in the light.
So I think just for a moment, you got the feeling of, what it means and why I dedicate one of the candles to Chanukah. I see Chaim just got onto the webinar as well, and he's rather hungry this evening. Erev Tov, Chaim. This next candle, it really speaks for itself. It's about home. And I wanted to dedicate this candle to my home, Kibbutz Tzora. Kibbutz Tzora, by the way, and I'll say this, you'll hear me say this again in the little clip, was actually founded on Chanukah, 1948. Why was it founded in Chanukah 1948? It was founded in Chanukah 1948 as one of the Yeshuvim, one of the Jewish communities that protected the road between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. There's just a few moments, and there is somebody who appears who is the quintessential Israeli. I didn't ask her to be part of this. I didn't think she'll be part of this. She doesn't take any prisoners, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. I really wanted to dedicate one of the candles to home. And I brought you to a sign at the entrance to my home. I've lived on Kibbutz Tzora now for many, many years, in fact, close to 35 years. Let me say it in the following way. For the first 16 years of my life, I slept in the same bed in Somerset West in South Africa, where I was born and grew up. Then for many years after that, I moved from place to place, from bed to bed. Now for the last 35 years, I've been on Kibbutz Tzora. And if you look at the sign, you'll see that for our purposes, this really fits beautifully, because my home, Kibbutz Tzora, was founded in Chanukah 1948. Why was it founded in Chanukah 1948? Because it was during the War of Independence and the road to Jerusalem had to be secured. So 2 groups of young people, one from the Palmach, fighting forces that helped create the State of Israel, and the second from Habonim, South Africa, the youth movement that I grew up in, came and settled over here and helped secure the road to Jerusalem. In their honor, we should dedicate this candle to home. But I need to show you a couple of other elements of what really makes this home. Come with me. First of all, I just wanted you to see the entrance to the kibbutz. It is really absolutely gorgeous. These things don't happen on their own. So let me just walk with you for a moment and show you that over here, hey Tzipa, lana tolechet.
תפסיקו לבלבל את המוח ותצלמו ותגידו לי למי אתם שולחים.
So this is Tzippa. She is one of the veterans of the kibbutz, and she is not happy sitting back and relaxing in her retirement years. She is responsible for the beauty that you see here. One of the wonderful things about my home is that people can continue to be active and make a contribution. And that is what Tzippa is doing. She wants you to know that she is 85 years young, and I assume she'll be doing this until 120, until she's 120. Tzippa at 120.
יש שחרור?
Yes,
אני צריכה...
All of our homes have certain visuals connected to them, certain sounds connected to them, certain tastes connected to them. My home also has certain smells connected to it. You are standing with me now at the refet, the cow sheds of Kibbutz Tzora. If you breathe really deeply, you can probably smell the incredible smell of my home, the smell of cow shit. Isn't it good, folks? One more place to take you on the kibbutz. So we saw the beauty of the flowers at the entrance of the kibbutz. We went over to the dairy, to the refet, to smell that wonderful kibbutz aroma. And this is the third place I wanted to bring you to. One of the children's houses on the kibbutz, one of the preschool areas. We have about half a dozen of them, where children from the age of 3 months up to 6 years spend their days from 7 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. The kibbutz really became a home for me when I became a grandparent.
Okay, so folks, we have one last candle. And I thought to myself, where do I do this last candle? So I went onto Google and I started, doing what we all do. I put in keywords, and I found something that I needed to put as part of this for you, as part of this Chanukah Tiyul in Israel. And on the actual day that I did the filming, I traveled all the way, for those of you who know Israel, down to literally to the Rafiach crossing, to the southernmost point of the Gaza Strip, where Egypt, Israel, and Gaza come together. And there's a moshav down there called Moshav Yated. I went there because I read about someone. I want to introduce you to someone for the last candle. I'm not going to say anything about it because I want you to meet him without me saying anything. The only thing I will use just 4 letters, and I'm hoping you all know what they are. The 4 letters I'm going to just for you to have in the background is PTSD. Okay, you all know PTSD. If you don't, P, post traumatic stress disorder. Okay, just remember those 4 letters. Think of where this is happening, and on the way down, before we get to meet him, I am going to stop just for a moment. I'm going to walk through an extraordinary memorial right near his home. In a few minutes, we're going to light the last of our 8 candles on this Chanukah Tiyul. We're going to light it just down the road at the home of a fascinating person. But I thought, since we've traveled this direction, I do want to take you to one of the places that I love taking groups to see in Israel. We are approaching a monument known as Andartat HaPlada. This is a monument which was created in memory of those members of the Armored Corps who fell fighting in the Six-Day War in this part of the south of Israel. The strangest thing about this memorial is it doesn't stand where it originally was placed. This memorial was originally in the town of Yamit. After the Camp David Accords, Israel left Yamit, and we decided that we could not just abandon this memorial because of the power of the memorial and who it's named for. And therefore, the entire memorial was taken out of Yamit and recreated exactly as it looked in Yamit in this place. As we get closer to the memorial, you'll notice, of course, the memorial plaques which mention the names of each one of the soldiers who fell fighting in the Six-Day War in the south of Israel. In addition, you'll notice the pillars, and each of the pillars has a piece of metal on them. And the pillars represent the soldiers, and the piece of metal represent that part of the military that they were a part of. I find this an incredibly moving memorial, and it is, in a way, it's ironic that it was moved from Yamit, from an area that we gave back to help create peace, and now it's found right on the outskirts of Gaza, a place that we are struggling with to create peace that we really want in this area. So folks, we've traveled a long way. Luckily, you haven't moved. You've just been sitting in front of your computers and you haven't experienced the 130 kilometers that we traveled in the last part of our journey to get down to visit Yaron Bob. Why do we go all this way, you might ask? Why couldn't we just pop around the corner from where we were previously near Jerusalem? Yaron, tell us why we came over here. What is so special about you and what you do?
First of all, the sunset is very nice, but actually I live very close to the border between Gaza and Egypt. So actually it's about 1.5 miles to Gaza and 1 mile from Egypt. So we're enjoying the best of both worlds, rockets and penetrations. Now, the sad thing is that almost every day we hear explosives from the Egypt side, and there is a lot of activity and a lot of we hear machine guns and explosives in the background. So this is actually our way of life, to cope with the explosives, and we cope with the alarms and all the situation that is very, very stressful here in our area.
So I see on your shirt over here you have an interesting logo. And what the logo says on your shirt is rockets to roses. And I see a blacksmith's anvil.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Okay, first of all, rockets. As you can see, I have all the good stuff from our neighbors. You see, so we have, this is the Qassam, okay? And this is the Grad rocket that they're firing to all the cities in the south, like Ashdod, Ashkelon, Sderot, and Beersheba. Okay? So this is the Grad. Look here. We have the Zilzal rocket, and we have another kind of rocket that they are sending. See how many I have here.
And where are these manufactured, by the way?
This is actually, the Qassam rockets are manufactured self-made. Okay, they are taking irrigation pipes, sewer
In
pipes
Gaza.
in Gaza. The Grad rocket actually made in China. The Fajar rocket, this one that's firing towards Tel Aviv and towards Jerusalem.
Okay, just come closer. I want everybody to see the Fajar rocket.
The Fajar rocket, okay? This is the debris of the Fajar rocket, and this is what firing towards Tel Aviv and towards Jerusalem. Okay?
Where are they made?
From Iran.
Okay.
So the ship to Iran, smuggled to Gaza, then fired upon us. Now let me show you a very nice thing. This is the Iron Dome. This is the Iron Dome interceptor that when they are launching all of these rockets, we are firing this one, and it's maneuvered to the proximity of the rockets and then exploded. So it's take out in mid-air the rockets, so the debris are just falling like that.
So how do they all land up over here?
Okay,
They don't
this
fire
one
at
I
you,
need
right?
to tell you inside. Okay, come, let's go inside. I was a computer network administrator. I was an IT guy. And when I was working in the high school, one of the rockets fell very close to me. And from that situation, it's actually turned my life. And I decided to stop working as an IT guy, and I dedicated my whole life to do sculptures from the rockets, turning darkness into light. I'm getting the rose. I'm working on a new sculpture. I'm going to show you and you, but not the audience. They have to come here to see. This is going to be like my new thing, and it's going to be epic. Now, so I'm getting the rose. Now, the second I made this rose, I felt like a waterfall of cleaning energy that cleansed me from all the hate and the anger and the frustration. So at that point, I knew two things. First, it's better to me to work with the metal than to pay the shrink, which are a lot cheaper. Second, that I need to spread the word that we, the people of Israel, want to live in peace and harmony, and we don't want to. And whatever they throw at us, we transfer from darkness into light, from a bad thing into a good thing.
So folks, this is the 8th candle that I dedicate to resilience. And I have to say, for me, the notion of the people of Israel, the Jewish people being a resilient people is hugely important. I'm going to say one more thing, and then if people haven't, I know it's been a long journey and you probably are tired, but I want to say one more thing, and then if there are any questions. I do lots of journeys with people. Most of my journeys are in Israel, but I also take people to different parts of Europe, to Central Europe, to Western Europe, to Morocco, to South Africa. What I'm trying to do on the journeys that I do is try to create situations in which we, and I say we, not you, we, because I include myself very much in this, are forced to confront the big questions of life, which are, in my opinion, why do I feel connected to certain things? Why do certain things make me angry? Why do certain things make me sad? What do I love? What are the things that make that I need to keep my distance from? I think that's why we travel. I don't believe that we travel so I can say to you, you see the building over there? It was built in 1563 and was dedicated on the 14th of March, 1563. I travel with you because I want you at the end of these 8 candles to say to yourselves, what are the values that I would light my candles to? If I were to choose every night of Chanukah next year and the few nights that remain of Chanukah this year to dedicate my candle, what would I dedicate my candles to? And then what you're actually doing is you are saying to yourself, who am I? What is important? When I travel Israel, I say all the time to myself and to the people I travel with, what is this country supposed to mean? What did we set out to do over here? What have we achieved and what is there still to do? Because I am convinced that the state of Israel is a magnificent work in progress, that the state of Israel is the greatest project of the Jewish people, and we have a responsibility to nurture this project and turn it into the best possible version of what we set out to do. When I guide people, I say to them, look, if you are expecting to just tick the, this is your bucket list, you want to tick, I've been here, I've been there, I've been to the third place, you're on the wrong trip. On my trips, we need to talk, we need to understand what life is about. So I apologize for the fact that I'm terrible at the techie stuff, and that I wasn't able to, do sort of a smooth flow from screen to screen, but that's who I am. And if there are any questions, I would be delighted to try and answer them.
Julian, we love you for what you are, not for what you aren't. And so we imbibed every single moment, and we love the enthusiasm and the passion. Ladies and gentlemen, if there's no other comment, I'm going to ask Shane to end off the evening. So over to you, Shane. Shai.
All right. Thank you so much, Cedric. Julian, when I saw the invite come out, I was like, what an absolute honor and privilege to be with you again. And I have to say that this afternoon while I was traveling, I did cheat and watch the recording that was sent through overnight from International March of the Living. So that was a real privilege, and to see you again live tonight. I'll never forget when we met you first on that train from the airport in Warsaw into the center of the city, and you were listening to my father and I speaking in Hebrew, and something wasn't right with your smirk that I didn't, obviously a few minutes later when we started talking, it all made sense that it was you understood Hebrew too. So, your enthusiasm and absolute passion and love for what you do absolutely shone through, just like it did 2 years ago. And what a journey you took us on, an extraordinary journey. And here again, just sharing in your emotion. I mean, that girl singing also, I found that quite emotive too. So it was just a real privilege to be there with you tonight, just like it was 2 years ago. So thank you. On behalf of everyone here, thank you so much for your time tonight or this morning for you, and just wishing you and your family all the best. And thank you for taking us to your home as well. So thank you so much, Julian.
Thank you for having your daughter with. It was lovely.
ladies and gentlemen, I would love to wish everybody Chag Sameach. Enjoy
Chag Sameach.
the rest of
Chag
Chanukah. Have a
Chag
wonderful
Sameach.
end of year and a peaceful and healthy one. And I'm off to visit my grandson, who I haven't seen in Israel now since the beginning of COVID. So I will make my journey to Israel and share my time in Israel with them, and hopefully see Julian then. Thank you all
Amen.
for participating, and
Amen.
lots of love. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
All the best.
Carol.
Enjoy
Bye,
your
Sharon.
trip.
Bye, Sharon.
Thank you.